Cultural relativism or universalism? Do you believe that there is an objective right and wrong, or that everything's just a matter of perspective? So, in my opinion, the answer to that is a little bit of both. So, when it comes to eating certain foods or wearing certain clothing or something like that, then it is a matter of cultural relativism. I might find it strange that you eat bugs, but you find it strange that I eat cows. And that's totally fine and natural, organic, and it's even nice that we have differences. That's fantastic. However, I think that there are certain things that have nothing to do with cultural relativism, and it's used as an excuse to perpetuate hatred, discrimination, and things that should be illegal. So like female genital mutilation or enslaving certain groups of people. None of this is cultural relativism, or maybe it is, but that doesn't make it okay or acceptable, and we should condemn that.
The world is painted in shades of gray. What may be unjustifiable to some can be completely understandable to another given the context. Cultural relativism is the lens used to foster understanding wherein no position is regarded as innately moral or immoral. In my own philosophy classes during university, the professor used the example of Inuit infanticide to illustrate the concept. The term infanticide is meant to be rousing. It is the killing of babies, straightforward and without room for personal interpretation. Provided with the context that harsh winters and lack of food meant that caring for a baby could often lead to the death of the household, the takeaway was that Inuit people simply operated on a different value system than that of modern-day America, due to their unique environment and resulting culture. To balance this, the professor also noted that the women often had multiple husbands, a form of polygamy that inverted the typical pattern, meant to show how open-minded they were. That most of the children left to die were female, resulting in an imbalance of adult women available for marriage, was left unaddressed.
Instagram comment section, I had the audacity of referring to Thomas Jefferson as like mostly terrible after saying like fun facts about him or whatever. And then somebody was like, you can't judge the founding fathers by today's lens. That's not how history works. It's not time. And I was like, calm it down. That being said, you know what? I see you. But I would like to raise you Patrick Henry. For those of you who don't know, Patrick Henry was the first governor of post-colonial Virginia. Anyway, since we're talking about things that are bad by today's standards, but were fine back then, was it fine back then to imprison your mentally ill wife in your basement until she literally took her own life because of the torture of that scenario? Because I'm pretty sure that that was a felony. And if anybody is still wondering who Patrick Henry is actually the guy who's famous for saying, give me liberty or give me death. My point being, while I do focus sometimes on the positive and interesting things about these figures, that doesn't erase the atrocities of the past just because they're the past.
The truth is that what we consider right and wrong shifts often with the culture we belong to. 75 years ago, some Americans supported racial segregation and believed that some races were inferior to others. 150 years ago, a number of Americans directly profited off of slavery and were willing to defend owning slaves as a right. Just because a belief was widely held in the past does not mean that it wasn't wrong then. Slavery was wrong in ancient Greece. It was wrong in colonial America. It remains wrong today. Similarly, just because today many people support allowing violent male criminals access to women, prioritize the validation of their gender identity over the safety of women and children, and are willing to ignore the role of biological sex in these allowances, doesn't mean that it will always be viewed as such. Nor does it mean that there is no opposition today. Adam Labokin, a Canadian man who was convicted of the horrific rape of a 3-month-old infant boy, has begun identifying as transgender while incarcerated and is currently being held in a women's correctional facility with a mother and child unit. As reported on by Redux, in 1997, Adam Labokin sexually assaulted a 3-month-old baby boy in Queensville, British Columbia. Labokin was 15 years old at the time and had been hired to babysit the child. The infant was so brutally injured by the attack that he had to be flown to Vancouver, 410 miles away, to undergo reconstructive surgery. According to a 1999 news report by the CBC, clinical psychologist Dr. Steve Sigmund testified in court that when he examined Labokin in 1997, the teen had also admitted to drowning a 3-year-old boy in Queensville in 1993. Labokin was 11 when he allegedly committed the killing, and no charges were ever lodged against him because under the law, an accused must be at least 12 years old. As the court considered his case, Sugerman testified that Lebokin had described having sexual fantasies about children under the age of 3 and that he had a history of sexually aggressive behavior at school. Due to the horrific nature of the crime, Lebokin was handed a rare and determinate prison sentence in 1999 at the age of 17 and was declared the nation's youngest criminally violent sex offender. But despite the violent and sexual nature of his crimes, Lebokin is now identifying as a woman and has been transferred to the Fraser Valley Institution for Women in Abbotsford. I am a transgender woman and I was born a man, but now after surgery I became a full woman, Lebokin wrote on his Canadian Inmates Connect profile. I have a vagina, not a penis, and also have 720 cc's double D gel implants. Some past news reports speculated that the convicted rapist's breast implants were paid for by taxpayers and estimated the cost at approximately $10,000.
About how jails and prisons are unfair to women. Now, yes, I know it's hard for men. Guys, we're not talking about you today. This is for the ladies. So, I was serving time in Arkansas and I was denied bras. I don't know if you have boobies or not, but baby, it is very difficult to just have your it's not good. It hurts. Like, you need some support. You know what I'm saying? I was denied underwear, which is ironic because the only period products they would give you is like 2 pads a day. And where are you going to put it? Riddle me that if there's no underwear. Let's just talk about tampons and pads. We were denied tampons. We were given 2 very cheaply made pads that need to be changed like every hour. So the blood just sits there and it's so dehumanizing and so awful to have to beg for period products. The women were kept 23-1, locked down 23 hours a day, and the men were always out in this jail. Crazy, right?
Prisons are notoriously underfunded, overcrowded, and rife with abuse. While one can argue that if you're in prison, you deserve a little discomfort, it is important to note that prisoners are still people with human rights, and that if all it takes to strip away all rights and human dignity is to be charged with a crime, it becomes incredibly easy for your rights to be taken away. And of course, the reality that not everyone behind bars is there for violent crimes. In fact, the majority of women behind bars were convicted of low-level drug or property crimes, rather than violent crimes. Many of them were swept up in larger conspiracy prosecutions targeted primarily at drug dealers they were living with. Many suffer from mental illness or drug addiction. A large percentage of female prisoners have experienced physical and sexual abuse in their lives. One 1996 study of California prisoners found that 92% of women in prison had been abused, and often that abuse continues inside prison walls by male guards.
Can we talk about just how unsafe it is for women to be in prison? Because in California, there have been hundreds of complaints over the last 9 years, and there have been 4 guards who have lost their jobs and 4 prosecutions. Now, of those, 1 person did jail time, 1 had his court record sealed, the other had it dismissed, and 1 is still awaiting trial on more than 100 counts. And even here in Virginia, I know someone who worked in one of the women's facilities, and he ended up leaving. He actually broke his contract because he said he did not feel comfortable with what was happening on a daily basis. And when we consider the number of women who end up in prison coming from abusive homes and abusive relationships, who struggle with mental illness and addiction, we have to question just exactly what the system is doing. And if you've heard about the Stanford prison experiment, you've heard about them taking 2 groups of college students, turning 1 into guards and 1 into prisoners. And it turns out the reality is that there are a lot of issues with that study, there are a lot of conflicts about how it was reported, but the reality is when you put people in a position of power and there's nothing to check them, you will be amazed and probably disgusted by the things they do. And when you expose an extremely vulnerable population to that power, it becomes very ugly very quickly. And not all of the officers in these prisons, including these prisons where terrible things are happening, are bad people. The majority of the officers I met over the years were doing the best they could with what they had, but there was an underlying culture that was the issue. And until we address that culture, and until we address the things that we find acceptable or unacceptable, abuses will continue to happen. Though at least here in Virginia, I'm very happy to say that owing to the diligence and the hard work of a few, the Department of Corrections will have oversight for the first time in its existence. And hopefully that oversight board can prevent some of these abuses.
The perception that women's prisons are nicer than men's prisons, as well as access to female inmates, undoubtedly draws male inmates, especially those convicted of sex crimes, to identify as female to be transferred to them. While their surgeries are paid for by the government and rules are bent to allow the use of makeup, scars, and other feminizing products, women in prison face unfair struggles that directly relate to the parts of womanhood you can't commercialize and purchase. For example, Juanita, a imprisoned woman in Texas, writes, "In prison, we're strip-searched often, before we leave our cell, before and after work. Each time we must remove our pad or tampon," she wrote. "We're assigned 1 pack of pads and 5 regular-sized tampons monthly. If you're one of the heavy bleeders, women who have fibroids, or are premenopausal, the state will not provide you any extra items. You must purchase them. We aren't paid to work in Texas, and nothing is free in prison.
Anger helped me break the cycle of going back and using drugs and all the stuff that I did. I was mad. I was really pissed off that I was treated horribly and chained to a bed for 2 days after I gave birth to my first daughter. Right. I used that as motivation to never go back and completely retire and be a mom. I was going to talk about it and share my story and let people know just how bad it is. I was in facilities that didn't want to give women tampons, and I was not believed about pain. It is a very dehumanizing thing, and some of it is very petty. They do it because they can.
Reproductive control extends far beyond just periods, as Victoria Law and Rachel Nailbuff report that, in Arizona, prisons have induced women into early labor against their will. Between 2005 and 2013, California sterilized over 850 women, frequently without their knowledge or informed consent. Rather than spending state funds on job training, education, and healthcare, California, one of several American states which has prioritized the desires of men over the safety of imprisoned women, has spent nearly $2.5 million on vaginoplasties and hundreds of thousands of dollars on fake breast, laser hair removal, and facial feminization since 2017, when California became the first state in the nation to pay for prisoners' sex change operations. The State Corrections Department says it has not placed any limits on the type of procedures trans-identifying prisoners can request, and, as of early this summer, had received nearly 1,000 petitions for gender-affirming surgeries, agency records show.
A female prisoner says she was sexually assaulted by a trans inmate with male genitalia at an all-women's jail. According to the plaintiff, she reported the assault to Etna Mahan's staff, but was given disciplinary action instead. The woman is now suing the New Jersey Department of Corrections over the alleged lack of action taken about the harassing behavior of the transgenders. The lawsuit claims that 2 other prisoners became pregnant from sexual interactions with transgenders.
California's lack of guardrails for trans-identifying prisoners stands in sharp contrast to its rules around inmate dental care, for instance, which don't allow for root canals on back teeth, cosmetic tooth restoration or replacement, or treatment of oral ulcers, among other services. From 2017 through mid-July 2023, taxpayers have bankrolled at least 157 transgender procedures and treatments for 35 male prisoners, according to previously unreported records obtained by women's prison advocate Amy Ichikawa. 11 male inmates have received breast implants at a cost of more than $180,000, while 2 have received facial feminization surgeries for $184,000. 69 males have gotten laser hair removal for a total of $224,000. 40 female prisoners have had their breasts removed for a total of more than $1 million. 4 people on death row have received sex assignment surgery. What does all this mean? Quite simply, that the feelings and validation of men arrested and convicted for horrible crimes matters more than the health, safety, and dignity of female prisoners who overwhelmingly are incarcerated for nonviolent offending and have faced abuse prior to conviction. Back in 2014, just 131 California inmates identified as transgender. At last count this month, that number was up to 1,847, including hundreds who identify as non-binary. A 2022 report released by Canada's Correctional Service revealed that 82% of gender-diverse prisoners in Canada who had a history of sexual offending were men who identified as transgender. Almost all had committed their crimes prior to claiming a transgender status. The overwhelming majority caused offenses that caused death or serious harm to their victims, over half of whom were women or children. The lack of oversight of self-ID legislation means that a large number of men will see this for what it is, an escape route. Fox, welcome to the henhouse. This, dear viewers, is a repart. I have touched on prisons quite a bit. I've mentioned it in the past. I've mentioned another thing about prison reform instead of getting rid of prisons altogether. And the reason why I'm so interested in it is not just because I watched Orange is the New Black when I was in high school and really liked the show. It's because when you look at it like this, we have so much money being funneled not to bettering the prisons, not to making improvements on rehabilitation, on, getting people out of prison and back into their everyday lives. But no. All this money is being spent not even on healthcare that's needed inside of the prison, but on unessential surgeries, cosmetic surgeries. And that is insane, because if I as a woman was arrested and said I need bigger boobs or I'm going to kill myself, they would laugh at me, and that would be the end of it. But when a man says, oh yeah, I raped several children and women, and I would like to be a woman now, so I want breasts and to be in the women's prison, they say, yes, sir, of course, sir. And they plop them in there with these women. And in the case of Canada, they house low-level offenders with their children, which I think is a great thing, because it means that the family isn't broken up, the child is not being placed into a foster home. But that's incredibly dangerous if you're going to allow men with the ability to sexually assault women and children who have sexually assaulted women and children to live beside them. That is insane and incredibly stupid, and I don't see how it passed any kind of legislation, any kind of committee, because you don't have to look back 10 years down the line and say that was a mistake. You can look at it right now and see this is a mistake. But I guess common sense or just general intelligence, critical thinking, brain cells, are those, in high demand in Canada or something? Because I don't know how else you can explain this away. Anyhow, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below. As you can probably hear, I'm sick again. I have tonsillitis, and I'm pretty sure I'm coming down with something else. So, sorry if my voice sounds off, but I hope that this video made you as outraged as it made me when I figured this out. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.